There's a version of you that has been thinking about starting something for a long time. Maybe it's a business, a creative project, a channel like this one, or just a life that looks different from the one you're currently living. And you've thought about it so many times, in such detail, that it almost feels like you've already started. But here's the uncomfortable truth I want to sit with you on today. Thinking about it and doing it are not the same thing. They never were. And the gap between those two things is exactly where most people spend their entire lives. Today we are talking about the quiet difference between dreamers and builders. And I want to be careful here because I am not using those words as insults and compliments. I've been on both sides of this line. Most people I respect deeply have been on both sides. This is not about shaming the person who hasn't started yet. This is about understanding something so precise, so specific about human psychology, that once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. So let me ask you something before we go any further. When was the last time you had a really great idea and then immediately did something about it? Not tomorrow. Not after you figured out all the details. Right then. Because your answer to that question probably tells you more about where you currently sit on this spectrum than anything else could. Now let me give you the first piece of this puzzle. Dreamers and builders are not different types of people. They are different modes of operating. This distinction matters enormously because a lot of self-help content will tell you that some people are just born with the builder mentality and others simply aren't. That framing is both wrong and deeply unhelpful. What's actually happening is far more interesting. Dreamers are running a particular mental program, and builders are running a different one. Both programs are available to every human being walking around on this planet. The question is, which one you default to, and more importantly, why? Here is where the psychology gets genuinely fascinating. When we dream about something, when we imagine ourselves succeeding, when we visualize the outcome in vivid detail, our brains release a small but meaningful dose of dopamine. You feel that little rush of satisfaction. And here's the problem. That rush is real. It registers as progress even when nothing has actually moved. Researchers have found evidence suggesting that people who share their goals with others or spend significant time fantasizing about their achievement in great detail are actually less likely to follow through. Not more likely, less. The brain has already tasted the reward. The motivation to endure the actual hard work required has already been slightly diminished before you even began. Builders understand this intuitively, even if they can't always articulate why. They tend to be uncomfortable staying in the planning phase for too long, not because they're reckless or impulsive, but because something in them recognizes that thinking without doing eventually starts to feel hollow. There's a restlessness there, a low-level discomfort with pure ideation that keeps pushing them toward action. Now here's where I want to introduce some real tension into this conversation because it would be easy at this point to say builders are just better at taking action and dreamers need to take more action. But that's surface level. That's the kind of advice that sounds good and changes nothing. What I actually want to talk about is the specific mechanism that separates them. Because it's not about willpower, discipline, or some magical trait that certain people have and others don't. The real difference is this. Builders have a fundamentally different relationship with imperfection and incompleteness. Let me explain what I mean. When a dreamer imagines their project, their business, their creative work, it exists in a perfect state. It has no rough edges, no awkward launch, no terrible first version, no confused early customers, no embarrassing early episodes of a podcast or videos on a channel. In the dream, the thing is already polished, already successful, already complete. And so the actual process of building, which is messy and slow and full of small failures, feels like a step down from the vision. The real thing is always a disappointing version of the imagined thing. So the dreamer keeps imagining, keeps refining the vision, waiting for the moment when they feel ready to produce the version in their head on the first attempt. Builders don't have a cleaner vision. They don't have lower standards. They've simply made peace with a different truth. The early version is not the final version. The bad first draft is the necessary precursor to the good second draft. The confusing launch is the data that makes the second launch clear. They've accepted that the gap between their current capability and their eventual standard can only be closed by doing the work, not by thinking more about the work. This is the insight I most want you to carry with you from this video. The gap closes through action, not through preparation for action. The research, the planning, the strategy sessions, they have a role. But there is a point past which more planning is just sophisticated procrastination, and that point comes earlier than most people think. Here is something I have noticed in the people I consider genuine builders. They are not afraid of looking stupid in the early stages. Actually, let me revise that. They are afraid of it. Most of them are deeply afraid of it. But they have decided that being afraid and doing it anyway is simply the price of entry. They pay it. Dreamers often make a silent decision, sometimes without realizing they're making it, that they will wait until the fear is gone before they begin. And that is a wait that never ends. The fear does not leave first. The action comes first. And with enough action and enough time, the fear gradually shrinks. But it never entirely goes away, and waiting for it to do so is a strategy that guarantees you stay still. Now I want to talk about environment and identity, because these are two forces that don't get nearly enough attention in this conversation. Your identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are, exerts enormous gravitational pull on your behavior. If you have been telling yourself for years that you are someone who has a great idea for a novel, or a business, or a YouTube channel, then that story about yourself becomes comfortable. It becomes part of how you introduce yourself in your own mind. And actually finishing the thing would disrupt that identity in an uncomfortable way. Because once you've done it, you can no longer be the person who has the dream. You have to become the person who made the thing and now has to live with what it actually is. Some people find that transition genuinely terrifying. Builders tend to identify with the process rather than the potential. They think of themselves as someone who makes things, not someone who has ideas for things. This might sound like a small shift in language, but it fundamentally changes how they interpret setbacks. If you're a person who makes things, then a bad first attempt is just part of making things. It's on brand. It doesn't threaten your identity. But if you're a person who has brilliant ideas, then a rough first execution feels like evidence against your intelligence, your taste, your worth. So you protect yourself by never producing the rough first execution. The environment piece is equally important. We are not self-contained rational agents who simply decide to do things and then do them regardless of our surroundings. We are enormously influenced by the people around us, the spaces we occupy, and the systems we live inside. If everyone in your immediate circle is a dreamer, if the conversations you regularly have are about someday and eventually and when things calm down, then you are swimming in a current that flows away from action. This is not an excuse. It is a call to be honest about your actual environment and what it is doing to your default behavior. So what do you do with all of this? I want to give you something concrete, because this video should not end with you just feeling understood. It should end with something you can actually use. The shift from dreamer to builder does not happen with a grand gesture. It does not require you to quit your job or announce something to the world or completely overhaul your life. It happens in the smallest possible unit. It happens with one action taken today that moves your idea out of your head and into physical reality in some form, however small and imperfect. Write the first paragraph, build the first rough version, send the first awkward email, post the first messy video. Do something so small it almost feels beneath the vision, because that small, imperfect thing is the seed. The vision is just the wish. And wishes, however beautiful, do not become real things until someone is willing to be a beginner in public. The quiet difference between dreamers and builders is not talent, intelligence, resources, or luck. It is simply this. Builders begin before they are ready, and then they begin again and again, until one day they look up and the thing that only existed in their mind is standing in front of them in the real world, rough and imperfect and entirely real. You already know which one you want to be. Now go be it. If this shifted something in you, go deeper. The next step is already waiting for you.